Mention Scotland anywhere in the world, and for many people, images of castles, glens, lochs complete with monsters, tartan-clad Highlanders, whisky, shortbread, haggis and bagpipes all spring easily to mind. There is romance, drama, pain, loss, triumph, and a long history of war and conflict, mainly with the English. There are romantic heroes such as Robert the Bruce, William Wallace, Robbie Burns, and Sir Walter Scott, with his tales of Rob Roy and Ivanhoe, to inspire all visitors to step back in time and enjoy the atmosphere of a landscape that, thanks to its predominantly mountainous terrain, has been little touched by the ravages of progress. If you travelled as the crow flies from the northernmost tip of Scotland to the southerly extreme point, you'd cover a distance in the region of 275 miles. However, if instead you followed the country's coastline, you would clock up something like 6,250 miles, and for the majority of your journey you would see little evidence of human habitation. Scotland has a population in excess of 5 million people, but predominantly they make their homes in the country's central belt. There are 6 cities here, hundreds of towns and thousands of villages, and you will find plenty of wild heather-clad countryside with scattered isolated crofts. But travel to any of the nation's major cities and you'll discover a very different cultural heritage, and none, it has to be said, is more fascinating, with its population of around 500,000, than Edinburgh, the undisputed capital of Scotland. Before we begin our tour of the city, it's well worth taking a brief look at a potted history of Edinburgh to set the scene. The most striking feature of Edinburgh is the great rock upon which the city's castle stands proud today. This strategic vantage point has been occupied since Bronze Age man first laid claim to it in around 1000 BC. With clear views over the Firth of Forth, any approaching invaders could be spotted, and through the forthcoming centuries there were plenty of them. As the city grew in importance, the castle's buildings became more dominant. Great Scottish kings based themselves at this stronghold, and through the ages, such legendary figures as Robert the Bruce and Mary Queen of Scots all passed this way. Edinburgh developed along 4 roads, which set a straight course linking the castle end of the city with Holyrood Abbey, and this thoroughfare today is much better known as the Royal Mile, due to a palace being built on the site of the abbey at the end of the 15th century. Holyrood Palace is still the Queen's official Scottish residence, and every monarch since the 16th century has had considerable influence on Holyrood, making it one of the most historically fascinating royal palaces to be found anywhere. There was a time when Edinburgh almost lost its status as the capital of Scotland. Rioters in the city angered King James VI of Scotland so much that he threatened to remove the machinery of government to nearby Linlithgow in 1596. The wise folk of Edinburgh certainly knew the fiscal importance of being a capital city and instantly surrendered to the king's demands. The next fundamental change for the city of Edinburgh also came during the lifetime of this monarch, as the very same James VI of Scotland succeeded Queen Elizabeth I of England to rule the two nations in 1603 as King James I. Although the city's political influence dwindled, it remained the centre of the Scottish judicial system, with, to this day, Scotland maintaining its own very distinctive legislature in a constantly changing political climate. As the centuries progressed, Edinburgh became famous for its culture, with many Scottish literary giants being born in the city or choosing to live there. Scotland's national poet Robbie Burns came to Edinburgh in 1786, at a time when a new town was being developed to the north of the crowded, polluted streets of Edinburgh's centre. In fact, the city is still sometimes referred to by its aged nickname, Old Reekie, a title dating back to the times when the overcrowded, smoke-belching chimneys of Old Edinburgh blackened every nook and cranny. In true Georgian fashion, elegant squares and crescents flourished with designs from such great architects as Robert Adam gracing the new town, where the stylish, fashion-conscious Scots of the day relocated enthusiastically. Advancing rapidly to the present day, Edinburgh is now best known as a major Scottish tourist attraction, with the world-famous Edinburgh Festival more than doubling the city's population through the month of August. This arts extravaganza was originally instigated in 1947 to counteract the privations of post-war Britain, and it's grown from strength to strength ever since. Even the Fringe Festival, which started life as a few haphazard off-the-wall shows performed by students and amateurs, has blossomed into a much-loved, world-renowned occasion. It's worth mentioning here that if you want to see the Edinburgh Festival, then come in August. But if you want to explore Edinburgh the city, it's perhaps best to avoid the crowds and come at another time. For anybody visiting Edinburgh, whether you've plenty of time to explore at leisure or at a pace that necessitates sightseeing at speed, the castle is most likely to be your first port of call, and there is, in truth, no better place to start. Rising from the basalt core of an extinct volcano, today's Edinburgh Castle is an amazing collection of buildings and monuments commemorating much of the city's dramatic history, and for that matter, much of Scotland's national heritage. From the elegant sweep of the Royal Mile, the Esplanade, scene of the world-famous Edinburgh military tattoo, draws visitors towards the castle's 19th century gatehouse. Bronze statues of the legendary William Wallace and the tenacious Robert the Bruce stand proud either side of the entrance, and it's perhaps worth taking a moment to look at these larger-than-life greats so beloved in the story of Scotland. As the 14th century dawned, relations between Scotland and neighbouring England were at an all-time low. Edward I of England was not referred to as the Hammer of the Scots for his diplomatic skills, having seized the Scottish throne for himself, barbarically enforcing his own particularly unpleasant brand of law and order. However, the subjugation of the Scottish people wasn't quite as straightforward as he'd anticipated, thanks to the heroic efforts of William Wallace, the patriotic Scot responsible for raising one of the most dramatic rebellions in Anglo-Scottish history. By uniting the many wild Scots feuding clans, Wallace won a major battle at Stirling Bridge against all odds. Even after defeat at Falkirk in 1298, Wallace escaped capture to regularly terrorise the English while hiding amongst the heather-clad hills. only betrayal by his own stopped Wallace in his tracks as his 7 years of glory came to an abrupt end in London when he was hung, drawn and quartered in 1305. Dead but not forgotten, Wallace's cause was immediately taken up by Robert the Bruce, who was crowned Robert I of Scotland in 1306. English King Edward the Horrible Hammer was dying by this stage, but was so enraged by the Bruce's coronation that he redoubled his efforts, sending extra armies to quell such infamy. This forced King Robert to spend the early part of his reign in hiding, where, if Scottish folklore is to be believed, the most famous of the Bruce legends occurred. Cold, wet and disconsolate, Robert the Bruce sat huddled at the back of a dark, damp, dripping cave, contemplating giving up the seemingly never-ending fight against the English that William Wallace had begun all those years previously. A spider at the cave's entrance was diligently spinning a web, but each time the endeavour was completed, the wind and the rain swept the glistening threads away. Each time, the spider climbed back up the rocks and started the web all over again, and Robert the Bruce was inspired to take arms once more and see the cause through. They do say that at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, when the Bruce was outnumbered by the English 3-1, it was the memory of the spider that spurred the Scot on to one of the greatest victories of all time. Today, therefore, it's very fitting that these two great men should stand side by side at the entrance to Edinburgh Castle, guarding this magnificent bastion for evermore. Let us now lay down our arms and instead put on cagoules as we wander Edinburgh Castle, merely as humble explorers who can be little surprised at this typical weather. Inside the castle walls, there are many fascinating and functioning buildings from all ages of history. Dating from the early 12th century, St. Margaret's Chapel is the oldest building here, an enduring memorial to the devout and wise Queen who was the mother of King David I, one of Scotland's greatest early rulers. This fine example of a Norman chapel was restored for Queen Victoria in 1853. Unfortunately, the building's character was preserved without the addition of over-ornate 19th century embellishment. The view from this level of the castle grounds is panoramic and spectacular on a clear day with blue skies. Today is the norm, and a little cold here in November. We cannot control the temperature, but we have a short opportunity to synchronise our watches and timepieces. It's said that you can tell the difference between tourists and the native dwellers of Edinburgh at 1 p.m. daily from Monday to Saturdays, when the time gun is fired from the castle battlements. Local folk will just nonchalantly check their chronometers, but visitors who've not been warned have been known to run for cover, whilst the gathered watchers get a good view of the scene. The process is a pageant of discipline, as well as being mildly elaborate, utilising the tower and ball on Calton Hill some distance away, the beagle eye and the sharp reaction of the gunner being honed down to the shortest of moments. Fortunately, this is the only gun that's ever fired regularly, and when you see the size of Mons Meg, the famous siege gun, it's probably a wise call. Dating back to 1449, this amazing piece of ordnance could fire its huge missiles over a mile in distance, but rather inconveniently, if it failed to hit the target, it took over an hour to cool down sufficiently to reload and try again. Always erratic, Mons Meg rather blotted her copybook by exploding in a salute to the Duke of York in 1681, resulting in her confinement to the Tower of London. Restoration to Edinburgh Castle was only negotiated in 1829, when the greatly influential author Sir Walter Scott pleaded Mons Meg's case. This outdoor location is a recent change, as the gun was kept for some years down in the deep dark depths of the dungeons. Nevertheless, it's well worth visiting the vaults, as the French dungeons are known, despite Mons Meg being now on display outside St. Margaret's Chapel. The graffiti that you'll find carved into the walls was inscribed by Napoleonic prisoners of war who were kept here and who gave the dungeons their name. There's also a well-recreated display built to show how prisoners were housed and the conditions of the time. Above the dungeons stands the Great Hall, and it's worthy of special note. It is the best example in Scotland of a medieval hall constructed with a hammer beam roof. The chief assembly spot of the castle, whether it truly played a part in early Scottish Parliament, has yet to be proved. This room has a wonderful atmosphere. To look down from the minstrel gallery to the 95 feet of floor below, one can only imagine the festive spirit and Scotland's most important citizens gathered here, where they ate, argued, debated and even danced in the light of many candles and a large roaring log fire. The palace is of similar age and contains a superb display of Scotland's crown jewels, as well as the Stone of Destiny, a vital part of the nation's heritage. The Stone of Destiny was symbolically used for the coronation of Scottish kings until Edward I of England, the Hammer of the Scots from the William Wallace story, absconded with the stone and took it to Westminster Abbey in 1296. Centuries later, this iconic symbol has been returned to its rightful place in Scotland, and it's certainly been a popular restoration. Edinburgh, as a city, played a vital role in the tragic life of Mary, Queen of Scots, and it's here in the palace on the 19th of June 1566 that she gave birth to James VI of Scotland, later to become King James I of England. A saga of mismatched marriages, scandal, murder and intrigue surrounded Mary until, after 18 years' imprisonment in England, she was finally beheaded upon the orders of her powerful cousin Queen Elizabeth I. But more of Mary later, when we visit Holyrood Palace. There's very definitely a military atmosphere pervading the many buildings of the castle, and the fine Scottish National War Memorial is a beautiful and poignant tribute to the many brave Scots who've lost their lives fighting for king and country. There's enough to see in Edinburgh Castle to justify a day in a schedule, but we have television time to consider. We cannot leave without visiting the Half Moon Battery. On a clear day, Arthur's Seat can be easily viewed, and those with sturdy legs and a strong heart can give valid consideration to the possibility of climbing this important local landscape and indeed take photographs of the castle in all her regal glory. As we leave the castle grounds and venture onto Royal Mile, we immediately have an opportunity to taste, in both senses, Scotland's greatest export, This is the Whisky Heritage Centre. Here you can learn a great deal about whisky, and indeed there's a barrel ride tour that emulates a visit to a distillery, complete with the vented fumes of the Angel's Share. But the real highlight for me is the Diageo Clai Vides collection. Here you can see almost 3,500 individual bottles of whisky that must nearly represent every version known to mortal man. The prices of some of the rarer examples is impressive, and sadly I did not get the opportunity of a wee dram from a bottle that has remained unopened for over 100 years. Suitably fortified though by more realistically priced samples, we venture back outside to the Royal Mile, where rumours have spread of free drams and a crowd gathers. In a country famed for its deep-fried Mars bars and love of chips, it is good to see in reality Scottish residents and visitors take a great interest in their sport. One wonders if perhaps a small budget could be found to help them buy some hurdles, as their agricultural substitutes prove difficult for some, but easy humour for the gathered and less fortitudinous spectators. This is, in reality, a charity fun run. Extremely demanding and varied, this is no typical course and collection of obstacles, but the timing of a scriptwriter's pen can become effective at times. This way everyone, a free dram for all. That's it, down those steps that are wide enough only for two of you. As the runners' gasps and exhalations fade into the distance, the peace and tranquility of Royal Mile returns. We can enhance that feeling by entering St Giles Cathedral. This is the High Kirk of Scotland, one of Edinburgh's most architecturally important buildings. John Knox himself preached the first sermon of the Reformation on this hallowed ground. The witness reports of the time quote Knox as being so vigorous and active it looked as if he would break the very pulpit he was preaching from into bits and fly out of it. Records also show that a church was founded here as early as 854, but the current structure dates from around the 12th century. It's fair to see that the exterior is not the most breathtaking, and a circumnavigation shows the main entrance to give the best vantage point. But step inside this dark and moody structure, and you can experience a shift to light and grace in a matter of moments. Along the western aisle, we come to the statue of John Knox himself. Cast in 1904, contemplation of the silent statue can help recreate in our mind's eye the exuberant vision of his preaching from a time so long ago now. 1904 seems to have been a good year for St Giles, as it also saw the casting of the Robert Louis Stevenson bronze relief memorial. Although we've made mention of Robbie Burns and Sir Walter, in my mind Stevenson, with the writing of Treasure Island, Kidnapped and The Strange Case of Jekyll and Hyde, merits a high place in Scottish literature lore. There's much to see here at St Giles: heraldic carvings, sections of tombs and memorials from the medieval period, as well as more modern aspects such as the Burns window installed in 1985. However, top spot, albeit a rather dark and overbearing chamber, must be the Thistle Chapel. Considering it was completed as recently as 1911, it is a sombre place, demanding silence and thoughtful footwear. There are stalls for 16 knights, the sovereign seat itself, and 2 for royals. The Order of the Thistle is rooted in the Middle Ages, but the present-day faculty was created in 1687 by King James VII of Scotland, who also happened to be James II of England. However, let me steer us away from my historically inclined Celtic tribulations, and with a 30-degree turn to port, we can steam to another location with a right royal heritage. It is time to visit Her Majesty's yacht Britannia. This grand lady of the oceans now resides in the country where she was born and riveted. For over 44 years, she served the British royal family, travelling over 1 million miles to become the most famous ship in the world. Of course, she's carried all the members of the family, their guests, heads of state, heroes and heroines alike, but just take a look at her. She is a heroine in her own right, another majesty of the ocean waves. She represented Britain's monarchy and government as an ambassador all over the world, as well as providing a uniquely private residence away from the global stage for guests including the likes of Nelson Mandela and Winston Churchill. Although tradition, atmosphere, royal form and formality play a large part in HRY's ambience, it is a golden opportunity to get up close and personal with an insight into the life of the world's most photographed royal family. I think I'm right in saying it's the only place you can get to see the Queen's bedroom. The staterooms are splendid. Let your imagination run free as you consider the whos and whys and how much goodwill and effort was made and exchanged in these very regal places. You could be standing in the finest of traditional British country houses rather than a floating palace, where many luminaries, including the likes of Reagan, Clinton and even Noel Coward, have talked, discussed and negotiated for a better world. A centre of harmony focused on the very best of intentions and goodwill. There was a sense and atmosphere beyond the pageantry of royal representatives. I truly respected the Queen's most poignant of words when she stated, "This is where I can truly relax," during a lifetime of international commitment to Britain. It felt good to believe that this one place provided such a private opportunity for the princes and princesses to be a family, enjoy playing games, eating together, and generally getting the opportunity to chill down in the modern vernacular. From the royal apartments you can head to the decks. The exterior of Britannia glows with traditional British nautical finery. Unlike many royal establishments around the world, there's little in the way of gold leaf or precious stonework. Just layers and layers of clean white paintwork. Each stroke of the brush oozes pride installed by anyone who ever played a role in her construction, her active life, and certainly now with those who maintain and continue the ambassadorial role that was intended when she first took form in pre-World War II Britain. The bridge is a great place to stand, and I could feel Her Majesty as I laid my hands on the simplest of steering controls, having arrived with the preconceived expectation of some grand 6-foot brass-embedded steering wheel from some former flagship. As a lover of all vessels nautical, my special treat was to enter the engine room, and although her pistons beat no more, in the silence of the brasswork, amongst the smell of lubricant and salt water preservation, there still lingers an atmosphere of expectancy and a love of engineering, maintained by those who now take care of the very heart of the Royal Yacht Britannia. She may now rest in Edinburgh docks as the city's most popular tourist attraction, but she is so very much still alive, and so very much waiting to raise flags and signal, "Yours to command, Your Majesty." As signs of the day's ending approaches, we leave Britannia to her justified slumbers, and to stretch the evening a little further and see nighttime fall over Scotland's capital, there's no better spot to head to than Calton Hill. It would be fair to call this spot the other hill in Edinburgh, a primary location for both photographers and painters alike. From here, you get a great view of the castle at all times of the day, and to the east, Arthur's Seat sits proudly, thus completing the triangle of vantage points. This World Heritage Site accommodates many buildings of interest. On the southern face, the headquarters of the Scottish Government, which answers to the Parliament building just a caber toss away down the hill. On the top lies the City Observatory, and scattered about are several important monuments, including the National, the Robert Burns, the Dougal Stewart, and lastly, but never possibly late, is the Nelson Monument with its timeless time ball. This structure commemorates Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson's victory over the French and Spanish fleets at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 and was completed in 1815. Standing tall on the highest point of Calton Hill, it replaced an earlier mast used to signal shipping in the Forth. Taking 7 years to complete, because they ran out of funds, the time ball was added in 1853. But what is a time ball? It consists of a large painted wooden or metal ball that is dropped at a predetermined hour on a daily basis in order for mariners to verify marine chronometers. Historically, it explains its close proximity to the observatory, whose earlier role was to accurately gauge time. The gunner responsible for the 1 o'clock gun we watched at the castle earlier utilises this aging, obsolete system to this day, and the gun was primarily introduced to Edinburgh for the days when fog and mist obscured the view of the time ball on Nelson Monument for the Forth anchored and moored shipping. Of course, the question remains as to how the gunner at the castle itself overcomes the same obscurity issue, and I suggest the best way to get the answer to that question is to go and actually ask Alison yourself. I was privileged to film the very last firing of the old gun with the legendary icon Staff Sergeant Thomas Mackay MBE, otherwise known as Tam the Gun, some years ago now. It's been a pleasure to see the precedent maintained so impeccably by Bombardier Alison Jones RA this very day. As the sun sets over Edinburgh Castle, I am not alone in my effort to secure a good image. There's at least 10 others, some professional locals with insider trading knowledge of how the sun will behave, as well as tourists from all over the world. Young people gather with a few beers and a guitar, whilst older couples stroll hand in hand as we wait in anticipation the closure of the sun's curtains, and a lone piper located far away commits his mournful notes to the declining drift of the wind. The Palace of Holyrood House, more commonly referred to as Holyrood Palace, is, as mentioned at the beginning, the official Scottish residence of the Queen, or whoever has reigned over the last 500 years or so. Inside the grounds today, you can still see the ruins of Holyrood Abbey, from which the palace takes its name. The abbey was founded by King David I in 1128, after, as legend has it, his royal personage was thrown from his horse when being attacked by a giant stag. In the ensuing struggle, David found, by some miracle, a crucifix tightly grasped in his hands, with which he was able to ward off the fierce animal. That night, he dreamt of building a monastery upon the very spot where all this had occurred, to be named Holyrood, meaning Holy Cross, to commemorate his deliverance. Holyrood Palace didn't come into being until some considerable time later, when, at the turn of the 16th century, King James VI built a 4-storey tower with gabled roof and balustrade. The present-day northwest tower has been cleverly extended, with most of the construction taking place in 1671 around an Italian-style courtyard. The palace has been associated with many monarchs through the ages, but perhaps the most famous story is that of Mary, Queen of Scots, and her Italian secretary David Rizzio. Mary was unfortunate in her choice of husbands, and Lord Darnley, her second spouse, was an unmitigated disaster. With gossip rife about Mary and Rizzio, Darnley became incensed with jealousy, and he and a group of fellow conspirators set upon Rizzio and stabbed him to death in Mary's staterooms here at Holyrood in front of her very eyes. The poor Queen was 6 months pregnant at the time, carrying the future James VI of Scotland, and she was distraught at the loss of her favourite. Rizzio's 56 stab wounds confirmed the ferocity of the murder, and for centuries afterwards it was said that you could still make out the bloodstains on the palace floor. Today, a simple plaque marks the spot where Rizzio fell, ending one of the many tragic chapters in the life of Mary, Queen of Scots. History alludes to the possibility that she took her revenge on Darnley in due course, but that is a story for another day. Just across the road, is the Scottish Parliament building. I cannot pretend I'm impressed with the architecture, steel, oak, granite, and what appears at first glance to be a lot of surplus copper piping left over from a major plumbing exercise. I can't see this building weathering as well over time as the other important buildings in Edinburgh. Inside this future centre of power for a possibly independent Scotland is a different matter, however. Here democracy rules, and all are welcome into the very heart of operations, the debating chamber. As long as you remain relatively quiet and respectful of the ongoings, you can see the People's Parliament in action on a daily basis. Security is as it has to be in the 21st century, but the staff and all those associated with the Scottish Parliament are extremely courteous and keen to encourage the involvement of any member of the public, however small or insignificant their problem or query may appear. With a clouded sky and imminent rain, we are wise to seek solace and security from the elemental influences of Edinburgh's erratic weather, giving us a good opportunity to explore inside some of the city's more important locations. 5 minutes walk, and we arrive at the house of the previously discussed Scottish reformist John Knox. Within sight of St Giles Cathedral, due to his failing health, Knox lived and wrote here from the time of his return to Edinburgh until his death in November 1572. Dating from around 1470, this building has been magnificently maintained and restored where and when relevant, thus making it one of Scotland's greatest cultural treasures. The house was home to James Mossman, goldsmith to Mary Queen of Scots initially, when Knox took up residence after a fervent European tour. Standing tall but small over 3 floors, there is much to see in the detail, and you can virtually touch history and feel the atmosphere of the great speaker rehearsing his forthcoming sermons with wild gesture and cataclysmic voice work. Indeed, the building is now incorporated into the Scottish Storytelling Centre, where modern time vocalists can express their work, some famous, some not so. Despite the apparent modernity of this well-lit and open space, you are not far from the atmospheric lodgings of the man who, at his funeral, the Protestant regent, Earl of Morton, paid testament to Knox's life and work by saying, "There lies he who never feared the face of man." Closer than you could hurl a sermon is a venue truly to be visited by anyone of any age. The Museum of Childhood was developed from the personal collection of Edinburgh Town Councillor Patrick Murray, who founded the museum in 1955 after proposing that it be dedicated solely to children. Spread over 5 floors with 5 different galleries, it has moved on extensively from being just a collection of toys and games. Not only can you view the collections of dolls, teddy bears, train sets and bicycles, you can find out how children were dressed and educated throughout the ages. Some aspects are interactive, allowing hands-on participation for children. But the greatest surprise of all here is the impact of such items to an adult. I was personally moved and affected by coming once again face to face with special toys and artefacts that had not been in the forefront of my mind for almost 50 years. Some famous, some not famous, toys I could remember having, precious cars and animals. Even the actual early television puppet characters that I remembered rushingly well from days of monochrome. I would pretty much guarantee that most grown-ups in the Western world would find one toy or feature here from their own past, be it doll or plaything, seaside arcade machine, or hobby horse. Whether you are 5 years old or 100 years old, there's always still the child within us, and it is still all here at the Museum of Childhood to jolt our memories and feed us happy thoughts of our more innocent times. Onwards, back up Royal Mile, passing St Giles previously visited, towards the castle again, but turn left and zigzag. The National Museum of Scotland is housed in a magnificent building that was designed by Captain Francis Folk in 1888, a veritable monument to the era's ideals of self-improvement. With warrens of corridors and rooms running off a truly impressive central hall, the place was crammed full of everything from stuffed animals to the most precious ancient relics of Scottish history. By the late 20th century, it was evident that a museum of Scotland on this scale definitely needed more space, and a new extension was built to house the complete story of Scotland. And so, standing inside the Victorian grandeur of Captain Folk's flight of fancy, you'll see one of the most important modern Scottish buildings. The contemporary designers Gordon Benson and Alan Forsyth confidently changed the appearance of Chambers Street forever, and visitors from all over the world come not only to see the thousands of exhibits, but also the fabulous new building in which they are housed. The pleasant irony is that one of the most popular exhibits is devoted to modern Scotland as perceived by her people. The public were invited to choose objects representative of the age in which they lived, and the result is a unique image of the modern-day Scot, alongside the most precious ancient artefacts belonging to Scotland's rich and fascinating history. But since my last visit here, there have been great changes, and very impressive ones. The new galleries opened to great acclaim in July 2011, and if I were not burdened with cameras and time restrictions, I could so very easily spend 2 or 3 days here, although I have been advised that camping in the main gallery is not appropriate. As time slips by so quickly now, we take the last steps together on our journey through the capital city of this unique and rugged highland. Or, to be far more accurate and journalistic, 287 steps. But while we gather our strength and resolve for this most significant of Edinburgh's escalations, we'll take stock of history and hopefully have reserves of energy for the journey ahead to be rewarded by what I believe to be the greatest views of Edinburgh. This Victorian Gothic monument is a little over 200 feet tall and acts as a tribute to Sir Walter Scott, our aforementioned Scottish literary hero. When the great pen crafter died in 1832, a competition was held to see who could come up with the best of designs for a lasting memorial to the quilling Scottish king. And the unlikely winner was a man called Kemp, who'd forever be delighted at the achievement when he'd assumed early on that his offerings would be duly dismissed because no one really knew of him as a draftsman and self-taught architect. But he proved himself to be wrong, and he must have been thrilled on the 15th of August 1840 to see the foundation stone laid. Nearly 4 years later, the monument that will truly stand the test of time was completed when Kemp's son laid the final stone. Sadly, after realising such a proud dream, George Kemp, the successful designer and father, was walking home from the site in March 1844 one foggy night when he slipped and subsequently drowned in the nearby Union Canal, never to see his son place the finial. Centre stage at ground level is the enormous white Carrara stone statue of Sir Walter himself, complete with feathered pen and accompanying dog looking loyally at his master's face. Steadfastly climbing the increasingly narrow steps, it seems an interminable time until all Edinburgh opens out before us, and I'm sure Scott would have appreciated this testimony as all roads and highlights of the city are revealed. From here, in every direction, we can see the three focal points of Edinburgh, as well as the arteries and veins of this really splendid city. Arthur's Seat lies to the south, a begrudgingly brave reminder of another option to climb, and seen from this vantage point as a clear place of watchdog and outpost in early times. To the east lies Calton Hill, with its many memorials, time ball and mildly out-of-place monument that would be better served in Grecian climes. And of course, to the southwest, the arrogant outcrop that provides a sturdy platform for the castle and its historic spot of surveillance. Just below us on Princes Street, a primary artery, is embedded the once fashionable but still iconic building known as Jenner's. And of course, to the south lies the land of the English. But such historic antipathy is just that these days, and left well, if not always safely and accurately, in the hands of storytellers. Indeed, I would love to use this platform to predict the outcome of all referendum regarding the independence of Scotland. But whichever way the governing future heads, this very land lies strongly and forever on its granite base, and Edinburgh, as the capital city of Scotland, is a hit as a target to visit as equally and as accurately as the castle's 1 o'clock gun.